Welcome to the Polite Conversations podcast, where every episode is focused on civility, decorum, and good manners. And I'm your lovable, non-controversial host, Ina. If you know me, you know I definitely don't like to ruffle any feathers at all. Hello there, dear listeners. I am currently writing a series over on my Patreon on something that's pretty personal to me, the Ex-Mus to TradFash pipeline. It's a path I've seen too many go down, unfortunately, and completely descend into blatant far-right fuckery. I've dedicated a fair bit of time this month to unpacking this phenomenon more broadly and to documenting the far-right trajectory of one ex-Muslim in particular, previously thought to be one of the better, more moderate ones by many who had followed the new atheist and ex-Muslim scenes. Anyway, if you're interested in this type of thing, do subscribe via patreon.com/nicemangoes. You can get an annual subscription for as little as $10. Though if you're interested in the mini-series like the Global Far Right and Woking Up, I would recommend and request that you sign up at the premium tiers if you can, since that is what really helps support and fund the extensive work that those specialty miniseries require. I have dozens of messages asking about when the new Woking Up will be released, but as I've said before, there's something very different happening with podcasting right now. Well, I can see that it's a great time to be a right-wing or even so-called centrist podcaster. It's almost always a great time to ally with or sanitize the status quo. But if you listen to my techno-fascism episode recently, you will know that these social media platforms have made it a truly hostile environment for leftist content creators generally, but especially small-time ones. And large leftist content creators don't really help to boost anything outside of their cliques, unfortunately. I can see a very visible difference in the engagement from a couple of years ago, and that has an effect on the podcast as a whole. Pro-Palestine content is also routinely suppressed. There's been an exodus of leftists from the Hell site, formerly known as Twitter, which of course is completely understandable. But, this kind of thing isn't great for small-time lefty content creation on several fronts now. Despite my efforts being ramped up, it has been a rough and demoralizing time. So if you enjoy the show, please consider supporting it. Otherwise, it'll have to fade away eventually. And if you enjoy the miniseries, also please consider supporting it, because as you see, the miniseries, like Woking Up, have become much harder to produce since they are a far more time-consuming project. I have definitely thought about permanently making full episodes Patreon exclusive and only partially releasing them on the public feed. I will continue to think about that a bit more for now. I'd really rather not, but it's getting difficult to keep putting out content for free for thousands and thousands of people when such a small fraction of listeners will help keep it going. And I completely understand it's rough times for everyone, but that means for content creators included, it is becoming more and more unsustainable. Another important way to help the show is to leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and to subscribe to the YouTube channel. I would really, really love it if you could, please and thank you. And anyway, parts 1 and 2 of this Ex-Mus to TradFash series are now up for all patrons, with lots of screenshots and links. You know me, I've always got receipts. Part 3, which is the absolute wildest part, will go up for premium patrons soon, and then eventually for all patrons. We've also got a special mega episode on Steven Pinker coming out soon. Patrons always get early access, and then there's more Patreon exclusive stuff queued up for next month. And yeah, if you think you'd enjoy this series on the fashiness of online ex-Muslims, once again, please consider supporting the show. If there's enough support, I will unlock it as a public service. It truly is an under-discussed subculture in the world of right-wing radicalization. Oh, and dear patrons, let me know in the comments on Patreon what you thought. It's always so good to hear your feedback. Would you like more written posts? Because that's something I've been thinking about doing more as well. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Otherwise, it feels like I'm talking to no one. And now, let me read you some excerpts from parts 1 and 2 just to get things started. Then you can check out the full pieces with plenty of fun and horrifying supporting visuals. Find both links in the show notes. Over the past decade or so, it's been immensely embarrassing to watch the trajectory of the ex-Muslim movement shift increasingly rightwards. Mostly I've followed and was briefly involved with the segment that is an offshoot of the new atheist scene. But I'm also aware of the fact that many ex-Muslims have found their niche or large platforms after leaving Islam and embracing Christianity, thus becoming a useful token for religious propagandists on the Christian right. But that Ex-Mus to Christian scene is certainly not my forte. Gross and intriguing as it is, I specialize in the more secular variety of fashy fucks. Sometimes there is crossover though. Later in this series, I'll be taking a closer look at one of the prominent figures in the new atheist subset of ex-Muslims, once thought to be a reasonable, rational, moderate type. Highly praised and repeatedly personally boosted by Sam Harris himself, Sarah Haider. We all know his track record of hand-picked friends and allies is impeccable, right? I was drawn to the scene in its formative years, being a non-believer myself. I was and am generally not a fan of religion and passionate about advocating for a destigmatization of non-belief, specifically in Muslim communities, where it's unfortunately still quite taboo. I genuinely felt it was a force for good, advocating for minority rights. However, my time spent in this ex-Muslim movement soon alerted me to an unfortunate, repetitive theme among those within it, who perhaps joined with noble intent at first. The love bombing and the incentivization from both the so-called center and the right is intense. I can personally confirm this since I experienced it even while actively trying to deter right-wingers from latching on to my voice and perspective. Unfortunately, this phenomenon is hard to resist for many. One hears about that fierce love bombing and cult dynamics too, and with ex-Muslims, this is what sweeps so many in. The intensity of the right-wing tide carries them to strange conservative destinations, which ironically have extensive overlaps with traditional conservative Islamic values. Be it in Modi's India, Europe, North America, or Israel, Muslims are often reduced to a barbaric monolith, painted as inherently violent and unable to coexist with quote-unquote civilized societies. There is no shortage of mainstream platforms and book deals available to those willing to be complicit in this dehumanizing, regardless of the quality of their takes. On the surface, amidst that group of willing tokens, Sarah Haider did in fact seem to be maintaining a guise of moderation for a while. But some of us who are more closely involved with the atheist scene and already alarmed by what passed as reasonable, secular criticism of Islam saw several red flags years ago, the first of which was being extremely friendly with Dave Rubin, appearing on and using his platform for personal gain till, it became clownish to do so. Ex-Muslims are often overlooked as a serious node of radicalization, despite there being endless examples. They're important to the right and far right in a similar way that figures like Candace Owens can be used to undermine movements for racial equality. When cloaked in the identity of the oppressed, people aren't scrutinized as harshly by their opponents, especially if those opponents happen to care about oppression and injustice, even superficially. And because of this asymmetry, the right and even mainstream center continue to inundate us with a dizzying number of minority tokens to push convenient narratives they feel the cis, het, white right couldn't get away with so easily. Okay, I must admit, I was a bit shocked by the "Is killing your dog cruel?" video. It takes an incredible level of contrarian brain rot to want to make excuses for the Kristi Noem dog murdering story. And they really did make excuses. I made sure to listen just in case it was just a clickbaity title, Nope, they were indeed just asking questions and talking about how this happens in rural life all the time and how it's sometimes the more humane thing to do, actually. And even some of their dedicated heterodox listeners were fucking disgusted in the comments. Do note that Razib Khan makes an appearance again. They sure talked about some very big-brained ideas with him, too. Like the fact that fat men are supposedly jolly because fat is feminizing. And if they have a gastric bypass and lose a lot of weight, they end up experiencing excessive rage because they no longer have that feminizing fat anymore. Now, I probably don't have the right skull shape to comprehend the intellectual depths of things like this. But to me, and I'm no geneticist, that sounds overgeneralized and kind of like garbage, based on derogatory tropes. But what would I know? They then discuss how Me Too has ruined corporate tech culture and how supposedly men can't even make eye contact with women anymore. Sarah mentions that men won't even Zoom with her alone now because of Me Too culture. Now, as someone all of these people would identify as woke, I certainly haven't ever had trouble having a friendly Zoom conversation with lots and lots of men. I have to do it quite frequently for the podcast, and it has never even occurred to me that this should be awkward. Sarah's co-host, Dom, declared that mainstream culture is a femisphere, and Razib affirmed that by saying left-wing men are indeed embedded in a gynocracy. In another episode, Dom said that in today's culture, white men are treated as fair game for being a punching bag. Now, none of these ludicrous points are followed up by or supported by any facts. We're just supposed to accept it and act like this is all perfectly reasonable, rational, normal-sounding stuff. I honestly did not think I'd encounter a, won't someone think of rapist Harvey Weinstein level of bad take? But here we are. I brace myself for more and rush through a few other episodes at the highest speed YouTube will allow. There's an anti-mental health and therapy theme that emerges. I've seen that in Sarah's tweets too. And out of all these vile views and topics, it's the anti-feminist stuff that doesn't leave me. I'm both amused and nauseated at the full circle Sarah's come from rejecting conservative, religious, Islamic misogyny to embracing it if it's non-religious and Western. It makes me think that misogyny was never the problem for these types. It was the fact that it was coming from Islam or religion. If the tech right were to pitch some secular version of The Handmaid's Tale, these would be the types of people that would happily go along with it. Perhaps even just own the libs. And that's it from me today, dear listeners. Again, if you'd like to read the full pieces, please subscribe via patreon.com/nice mangoes. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support it, there are several ways you can do that. You can share it online, talk about what you just heard. You can leave a 5-star review to help others find it too. And you can also subscribe via patreon.com/nice mango in mangoes. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter before it's completely wrecked, you'll find me at Nice Mangoes. Again, no E in mangoes.